I think it is remarkable that if you look at now, 76 years of the alliance, just how the fundamentals of the alliance have stayed the course. And so, if you were trying to get NATO reduced to a few words or themes, I mean, they are probably the themes that were in people's minds when the North Atlantic Charter was signed in 1949. Words like security, unity, resolve, deterrence, and the security for the 1 billion people who are the NATO nations in the alliance.
Welcome to the Allied Air Power Podcast, NATO's sole broadcast that patrols the full spectrum of air, space, and cyberspace. I'm your host, callsign Houdini. Now, at the end of October of this month, we're going to bid farewell to our Deputy Commander of NATO Allied Air Command, Air Marshal Sir Johnny Stringer. Our DCOM has been here at AirCom since August 2022 and has served as our acting commander since May of this year. On this episode of the show, we get to sit down with the boss one-on-one to recollect, reflect, and remember his impactful tenure at AirCom, leading the transformation and innovation of how NATO delivers air and space power in defense of the alliance. Personally, it was a real treat to chat with the boss. An Oxford-educated intellect, Air Marshal Stringer has a masterful way with words, equally substantial as it is stylistic. Few have the powerful quality who back up their elegance with words, with real action. I, as many here at AirCom, are truly going to miss his witticisms and his pearls of wisdom. Now let's have one final chat with the boss. Today on the Allied Air Power Podcast, we have my boss, Acting Commander of NATO Allied Air Command, Air Marshal Johnny Stringer on the show. A former Typhoon Wing Commander, he's also served as Chief of Staff at UK Joint Forces Command and Director Strategy at UK Strategic Command. A QWI with 3,000 plus hours and, which I think is really cool, a master's degree from Oxford and KCL. He bridges tactical flying, operational command, and grand strategy. Sir, and like I said earlier before we officially started recording, I know you're a very, very busy man, so I appreciate your time personally and professionally. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Allied Air Power Podcast.
No, it's great to be here, mate. Thanks.
Well, sir, tell us a little bit about yourself. Oxford educated, flying Typhoons. I mean, you're living the dream.
Yeah, well, I'm very old. Or maybe both. So I was sponsored by the Air Force back in the UK in my last 2 years at school before university. And then they kindly sponsored me as a university cadet between 1987 and 90. And I read history there, that famous aeronautical subject. But I was sponsored to be a pilot. I managed to fly about 200 hours at university and then kind of straight into officer training and then pilot training after that. Spent almost 10 years flying the Jaguar single-seat fast jet in the ground attack and tactical reconnaissance roles. Did that operationally over former Yugoslavia and then policing the northern Iraq no-fly zone. And then they sort of staff things that you do, whether they were Air Force tours or whether they were in what we call the sort of joint appointments, so tri-service, including the Ministry of Defence. Bit of military education in there as well, so the sort of advanced and then the higher UK staff colleges, Royal College of Defence Studies, which is a fabulous year-long course as well. And then just before I came to NATO, I did a year with the tech startup. So I've been really, really fortunate as I've gone through my career and done some fascinating stuff operationally and on exercise, worked with some fabulous people. And now, just coming to the end of 3 and a bit years here at AirCom at Ramstein.
Wow, an impressive career, sir. And here, during your tenure here at AirCom, how have you seen Allied Air Command change and evolve from beginning to the end of your tenure?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's an obvious thing. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine kind of resets so many things, although, the markers were there from Georgia in 2008 and the annexation of Crimea in 2014. And I think, but 24th of February 2022 finally showed people, the reality of Putin and Russia. And for 3.5 years I've been here, have really been focused on how we kind of reset NATO air and space power. 35 years ago, when I was just finishing university, hey, it was the end of the Cold War, liberal democracy has triumphed. And sadly, that has not been the case. But we saw 30 odd years of disinvestment, not just in terms of money, but in terms of our thinking as well. And we're now kind of arresting that and resetting it. And then we'd also had 15 odd years of counterinsurgency operations, a long way away from Europe. And there's that sense of, we do this contingency, crisis response operations, discretionary, whatever term you want, at range, and then we come back to our safe havens in Europe and we reset ourselves. And I think sadly what we've seen is that 30 odd year period of peace, relative peace, has come to an end, and we now need to face the fact that we're in a different place, and we are in that place for many years, I'm afraid, and therefore we've got to get air and space up to speed for it.
So one of the things I've always really respected about your leadership is your ability to predict things. I know that might sound cliche, but every time in the all calls, you would say something, and I almost feel like, oh wow, that is where things are going. And I guess that leads to my next question. So you have this great predictive power, and at the risk of sycophancy, I do want to say you have had great foresight and leadership here at AirCom. Where do you see AirCom in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, if I'd had great foresight, I'd be able to predict the lottery numbers, wouldn't I? And I'd be able to do so. No, I don't. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I think it's any great. God, I don't think it's any great skill. I think. I mean, I've always been interested in history, doing my first degree, and I think there is an awfully large amount that you can learn from it. And therefore, being professionally curious in where we've been is at times quite helpful in trying to work out where we might be going. So, in terms of AirCom in the next sort of 5, 10 or whatever, I mean, what I would hope, knowing that hope is not a strategy, is what we've been able to do. Myself with General Hecker here as the comm for nearly all the time I've been at Ramstein, and him building on a very fine general who I worked for earlier in my career in Cobra Harigian. I think we pretty much established, I think, that the right vectors and the right focus areas. Two core missions, one of which is air and missile defense, sharing of information, getting our command and control right, getting our agile combat employment, which means many things to many people. But if you sum it all together, I think that direction of travel is going to maintain for some time. Now you've got kind of 4 or 5 big headlines there and 5 priorities. The thing we're going to have to do is make sure that the things that underpin or cut across all of those 5 priorities, things like experimentation, innovation, making sure that multi-domain operations are a genuine thing rather than a bumper sticker, all of those things are going to have to deepen, and they're probably going to have to accelerate in some areas as well. And I think one of the things you've definitely seen out of Ukraine, the Ukraine conflict, is the sheer pace of adaptation, and also the speed and the willingness with which particularly Ukraine has adopted new technologies. And I do worry a little bit that in areas of NATO nations, we're kind of still happier in the place we were before, because everybody's grown up in that sense. And we're going to have to really shake ourselves out of that and take a little bit more risk to seize a lot more opportunity.
I wanted to follow up on that. You said you're a student of history. My first thought, and I hope this is an apropos comparison, but Churchill, right?
was a student of history. And I guess a personal question is, how do you use history to inform your decision making and your leadership?
I don't know if it kind of directly informs, but we were actually having a similar chat today. We just started NATO's big sort of virtual exercise for the year, Steadfast Duel. The I don't know if it's so much hey, that happened in 1947, therefore. But it's quite interesting. If I take the example of air and missile defense, where I think we are now is rather like where NATO recognized it was in 1958, all those years ago, that the type of the pace at which the threat was evolving meant that NATO had to reset itself. And it did a great bit of work. And then it did many years afterwards, whether it was developing platforms, hardening airfields, getting its command and control better, whatever it may be, it did a whole bunch of things. And you kind of go, there are moments where the circumstances, if not the detail of what had happened before, you kind of go, that feels a bit like now. And you've got to be careful, of course, that you don't either draw the wrong lessons or you choose the things that you like because they confirm with your worldview. We're all
Confirmation bias.
yeah. Well, the other bit, of course, is optimism bias.
Yeah.
But so you've got to be slightly careful for that. But there are a lot of things which our predecessors had to face, had to analyze, and then had to come up with solutions for that I think have similarity, because at the heart of things, there's stuff like the nature of power, how people exercise it, how people seek to challenge either individual nations or alliances. So you can kind of go, there are things in our past here where we've been pretty good at dealing with things that continue to have relevance, even if the treatments are different.
And on that point, shifting gears a little bit, I got a little bit of an advanced copy of your biography, your future Sir Johnny Stringerism, sir. This is actually my next question. One of the things I truly have appreciated as a professional communicator in public affairs myself, I've always appreciated your sound bites, to be honest, because they're just so pithy, straightforward, candid. Some like Coolio, or probably not one for a happy book at bedtime, one of your witticisms. Oh, this one's my favorite. The answer is yes, qualified by that British phrase, ish. And then, this one. Let's stick to the evidence-based decision-making rather than the decision-based evidence-making. I as a student of philosophy, I've always appreciated your way with words. And that's my last question, sir. One of your famous adages here is better never stops. And it's such a powerful phrase. How have you applied that here at AirCom, and what does it mean to you?
But what I must confess is, as ever with these things, always steal great lines from other people.
Student of history.
Saying, I think nearly all of those things which I may have said, Coolio probably dates to an Australian exchange officer on the Typhoon 2007. Better never stops. And I do nearly always try and name check it. Is actually one of the Team GB slogans from the Olympics in 2012. And actually, you kind of go, it does really neatly sum stuff up, because there's a real danger, I think, that, and we particularly had it in our 30 years of relative peace, where there wasn't a sort of clear and present threat. There wasn't, but frankly, the existential threats that our forebears faced and our nations faced in the Cold War. And you could disinvest and you could kind of put stuff off till tomorrow or next year or next decade. And we're just not in that place anymore. And there is also something, I think, that is fundamentally about professionalism, that you should never be happy with what you achieved yesterday. There should always be that sense of, okay, how can I improve it? And again, 20 years ago now, I remember being at a conference in the UK, and they had the head of a UK entity that basically oversees largely safe working in the private sector, but also the public sector, a body called the Health and Safety Executive. And the then head of it said, high-performing organizations are at least as curious about their failures as they are their successes. That really struck me, and he was absolutely right, which is, when anything goes well, of course the tendency is to go, brilliant, we got it nailed. But the reality is, and back to the pace of adaptation and adoption of technology and the rate of change, that which was good yesterday is probably not going to be quite so good, indeed may not work at all, relatively speaking, tomorrow. So you've got to always look at everything you do and think about, right, how can I get it better? How can I improve that the next time I'm faced by it, or while I'm doing my planning to make sure that if we ever face it, we can be as good as we can be. So, they're my very tortuous explanation there kind of was very neatly encapsulated by the 3 words, better never stops.
Brilliant. That is brilliant. And sincerely, sir, for me personally, this is kind of like an end of an era, if you will. I was General Harigian. I served under General Harigian. When we were in the Middle East. And, when we ran into each other, you probably don't remember me then, but I do. And then General Hecker, I love General Hecker. So passing on the torch, moving on. I'm happy for you, sir, but personally, I'm going to miss you. What do you want to tell the men and women here at NATO Allied Air Command as you leave at the end of the month?
Yeah. So, and of course, it's Aircom's a broad enterprise, isn't it? It's not just the sort of 500 plus people here at Ramstein. It's the airborne early warning component out at Garlenkirchen. It's the ISR force down at Sigonella. It's the deployable air command and control center at Poggio. It's now our 3 NATO KOCs of Uden, Torrejon, and now Buda in northern Norway. And all those folk who are supporting and championing air and space power, the NATO Space Operations Center here at Ramstein as well. All these folk are doing marvelous stuff every day, and the successes that the headquarters and Aircom and the air and the space components have had really are a team effort. Like all things that really do tend to work, they are ultimately team developed. So the first bit really is just my very sincere thanks to everybody across Aircom, because they've done some very hard yards in the time I've been here, and they've really helped shift the dial. At times, NATO, certainly back to those sort of about 30 years of peace, it can always be challenging moving things on in the alliance, but folk have really moved stuff on, and I am so grateful for that. And as I leave, all I would ask all of them to do is just, hey, keep the torch burning, folks, because air and space are 2 areas that our adversaries really fear NATO and the nation's capabilities, and frankly, we need to keep it that way.
On that point, sir, because I'm going to milk the time I have in your calendar, getting reflective. What does NATO, broadly speaking, mean to you as
fair enough. I mean, in my time here, you've had variously NATO's 75th anniversary. You've also had 2 nations join in Sweden and Finland. So we now have an alliance of 32. And all alliances of any form that have value over time, they have their ups and their downs, their kind of ebbs and flows on stuff. But I think it is remarkable that we look at now, 76 years of the alliance, just how the fundamentals of the alliance have stayed the course. And so, if you were trying to get NATO reduced to a few words or themes, I mean, they are probably the themes that were in people's minds when the North Atlantic Charter was signed in 1949 and the treaty came into being. And those are words like security, unity, resolve, deterrence, and the security for the 1 billion people who are the NATO nations in the alliance.
Thank you so much, Air Marshal Stringer, Air Marshal Sir Johnny Stringer. Thank you, sir, for being on the show.
No, thanks, Jose. My absolute pleasure. Thanks.
That wraps up this flight of the Allied Air Power podcast and Air Marshal Sir Johnny Stringer's time at Allied Air Command. Today, we reflected on everything that's happened at Allied Air Command since 2022. From the illegal invasion of Ukraine to Eastern Century, Air Marshal Stringer oversaw significant change and transformation of various missions tasked to NATO AirCom. In his words, better never stops. We must continue to innovate, transform, and deliver air and space power across the Alliance. As he said, one of our greatest deterrents to safeguard the values and principles we cherish as a 32-member alliance is NATO air power. As a chapter ends, a new one begins. We're all sincerely grateful for Air Marshal Stringer's leadership, guidance, and wisdom, setting up AirCom for further success into the future. Now, if you found value in today's episode, share the show and leave a rating so others can navigate airspace and cyberspace with us. Explore deeper coverage anytime at ac.nato.int and send us your questions or topics you'd like us to tackle. Until our next story, stand ready in the air, secure in cyberspace, and steady on the path to the stars.